So this video is part of a series of videos explaining the changes you see on an ECG due to ischemia, and is aimed at second year medical students. So the assumption is that you guys, if you're watching this, you have a basic understanding of how a normal ECG is formed. I will be covering the basics in this video, but not directly. So if you do want me to make a video covering anything that you don't understand, drop me a message in the comment section below and I'll get back to you on it. So this particular video, in terms of cardiac ischemia changes, we're going to be looking at T-wave abnormalities, more specifically T-wave inversion, which is the most common that you're going to see. Now, T-wave inversion on its own can just be a normal variant in some people. So in infants, after about 48 hours, I think it is, you're going to see T-wave inversion, and that's normal. That's not a sign of ischemia. And it can be normal in adults as well, in V1 and V2, AVF, AVL, depending on the individual. And in AVR, it's always going to be negative pretty much all the time. It can be due to pathology such as hypokalemia. So the key point to understand and recognise T-wave inversion due to ischemia is that in ischemia, it's always associated with ST changes. And that can be either depression or elevation. Okay, so if it's just isolated on its own, no changes to the ST segment, you're either thinking of a non-ischemic cause like hypokalemia, could be a normal variant in the person, or it could be evidence actually of an old infarct, so an old ischemic bit of tissue that has died. Okay, the other thing you're going to match up against are the symptoms that they are experiencing. Okay, so to understand why T-waves become inverted in ischemia, we have to start with the basics. So I do apologise if I end up patronising you a little bit, but we're going to start with the very basics. So this is a normal ECG. This is your P wave, your QRS, and your T wave. Actually, I'm going to draw that again because I've drawn the P wave quite big. This is in no way to scale what they normally look like, but your T wave is usually bigger than your P wave. Okay, so this is P, Q, RS, which makes a complex, and this is your T wave. This is our hero of the hour. Okay, so congratulations, you now know what an ECG looks like. Okay, so that's what it normally looks like. Oops. If it's inverted, it's going to look like this. Okay, so bear that in mind. So this is a normal tracing. Now, the next thing you need to know is actually about the ECG leads. And the leads are the things that pick up the electrical activity and produce the readings. So the leads themselves aren't what you stick onto the body. The things that you stick onto the body are electrodes, and those electrodes are positive. So that's one thing. So the leads / tracing, they're not the same thing, but I'm going to use the terms interchangeably here. So the leads are positive. Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing is that they look at the outside of the heart. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that they don't look at the electrical activity inside of the myocytes of the heart. They look at what happens outside the myocytes. So, when a myocyte depolarizes, let's draw a little diagram here. This is depolarization. This is the outside. This is the inside. What we have is the movement of sodium ions into the cell. So all these sodium ions here, they're going to move into the cell, like this. There you go, look at that animation. They move like that. And as a result, we have the inside of the cell becoming positive. However, because the outside has lost positive charge, because the ions have moved from outside to in, it becomes negatively charged. Now remember, the leads only look at the outside of the myocytes. Okay? So when you have depolarization, what the leads pick up is negative charge. So even though depolarization is the membrane becoming more positive, what the lead sees is negativity. Okay? Conversely, when we have repolarization, God, I've drawn that very big. Let me make that a little bit smaller. No, that's a bit better. So we have, again, outside. We have the inside. What we have is positive potassium ions moving from inside to the outside, okay, so the efflux out of the cell. And the reason for that is that we're repolarizing. Polarization is becoming negative. So as these ions move, using this slick animation that's going to get me scouted by Pixar. There we go. As the ions move outside, the outside of the cell now becomes positive, and the inside becomes negative. It's now polarized. And the membrane now moves back to its normal resting potential. Okay? So if we have a lead on the outside of the cell, outside of the heart, as they all are, okay, just like this. Let's say we have our lead, for the sake of argument, here. Remember, it's positive. When the ventricle is depolarized, like this, we're looking at the outside. The outside is covered in negative charge because it's suddenly lost all these sodium ions that were on the outside and have moved inside of the cell. Okay, so the lead here is now picking up negative charge. Okay, however, we'll rub all this out. That's with depolarization. When we have repolarization on the other side, what we see is all these sodium ions moving out of the inside of the cell. Okay, so the efflux out, and suddenly the outside of the heart has all these positive ions. So the positive lead will now see a positive charge when we have repolarization. So hopefully that all makes sense. Now the next thing we need to understand is that, just get rid of this so it's less confusing. Actually no, I'm going to leave it there. Is why we get up and down strokes in an ECG. So what do I mean by an upstroke? Well, upstroke, let's say this is our normal lead. This is up, this is down. So why do we get that? Well, it's down to the way that the charge moves in the heart. Okay? So, remember, leads are positive. If we have, let's say the ventricle, we'll just stick with the ventricle for now. if we won't use a ventricle, we'll use that later. If we just have a lead here that is positively charged, if we have negative charge moving towards a positive lead, we have opposites moving towards each other, we get an increase in voltage, okay, an increase in signal. That gives us an upstroke. Okay? Whereas if the negative charge moves away from a positive lead, we have a loss of that signal, so we get a downstroke. Okay? So in depolarization, when the cell is becoming negative, okay, when the cell becomes negative, we have negative charge. If it moves towards the lead, we get an upstroke. If it moves away, if the depolarization moves away from the positive lead, we get a downstroke. Okay. In repolarization, the outside of the cell becomes positive, and if that positivity moves towards a positive lead, we get a downstroke, because we have two like charges, two of the same charges moving towards each other, or one moving towards the other. Okay, we get a downstroke. Whereas if we have a positive charge moving away from a positive lead, we get an upstroke. Okay, so that's a key thing to remember. If you want an upstroke, you need a negative charge moving towards a lead, or a positive charge moving away. Okay? So, we've now covered the basics of electrocardiography. Okay, an absolute roller coaster, right? So now we're going to move on to the bigger stuff. Okay, so if any of that didn't make sense, leave a comment down below, or pause this video and rewind and watch this bit again. Okay? So, now we've covered the basics, we're going to go into the big stuff. So when the heart depolarizes, we have our P wave, and when the ventricle and the QRS complex, okay, and the QRS complex is the one we're going to focus on, because that's the depolarization of the ventricle. So just move down a little bit here. Now when we get the reason we get a QRS complex is because the depolarization of the heart moves through the root of the bundle of His and the Purkinje fibers. Okay, so I'm going to draw that for you. I'm just going to draw the ventricle. So we'll start with the AV node here, the atrioventricular node. Okay, so we have the first part of the bundle of His, and then we have our two bundle branches. We have our right and our left. Okay, so complete the diagram of the heart first. Now let's say we have a lead over here. This is our positive lead here. Okay, so that's our two bundle branches. And then moves into the Purkinje fibers. Okay, the Purkinje fibers break off from the inside of the heart outwards like this. Move off like that. Okay, so when we start off, we've already had our P wave. Okay, let's assume that the atria is already contracted. First things first, step 1. Actually, we won't say step 1, we'll say which part of the QRS complex it is. That makes more sense. We have our Q wave. So, how does the Q wave form? Well, as the charge moves down, as the depolarization moves down to the from the AV node, and it first moves down the left bundle branch, this one here, and then it moves and it depolarizes the right bundle branch. So depolarization is moving from the left to the right, like this. Now, as we said before with this diagram here, if we have depolarization, which is negative charge, remember, okay, depolarization moving away from a positive lead over here, we get a downstroke. So the Q is down. We get a downstroke here. Then we have our R, which is here. As that depolarization moves from the bundle branch, it moves down the apex of the heart, this direction here. Okay. So in this lead here, it's moving down here first, so the Q is probably going to be a little bit bigger. And then it starts moving towards the lead. That gives us an upstroke, like this. And then we have the S, which is here. And that's moving this way, which is away from the lead. So the depolarization now is moving away from the lead again, so we get another downstroke. And then it returns to the baseline. And that's why we get a QRS complex. Okay? So if I've rushed through that too fast, rewatch it again. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense now. So, the thing that always confused me is that we get the QRS complex, which is the ventricle depolarizing. But when it repolarizes, we just get a T wave. We don't get a fancy QRS complex. We just get this, which never really made sense to me, because I thought that repolarization would move in the opposite direction and just move down the Purkinje fibres, along the apex, and then back up the bundle of His. But that doesn't actually happen. Okay, so that's depolarization. This is what happens here. Repolarization is a lot simpler. Okay, I'm going to show that to you now. So repolarization, the movement is, instead of following the Purkinje fibers, it actually moves from the outside of the heart inwards. So to illustrate that, if we draw the ventricle before the T wave, i.e. before repolarization, we have a ventricle. That's awful. A ventricle like this that is depolarized. Okay, let's draw our lead over here. Nice positive lead. It's depolarized. Inside is positive and the outside is negative. We see all this negative charge. Okay, that's before. I'm just going to move this over so we have a little bit more space to work with. Whereas if we go to the end, so after T wave, oh my god, that's awful handwriting, Jordan, come on. Okay, so this is after repolarization. The ventricle myocytes have repolarized, they've become negative, and they've lost all those potassium ions to the outside of the cell. So those potassium ions are outside, so a lead will see positive charge. So draw this nice and quickly. Okay, so if we have a lead over here again, it's going to see positive charge. So make this a little bit smaller. Okay, so that's before and after. So what happens during the T wave? During repolarization. Well, what you see is repolarization moving from the outside of the heart in, as I say. So what you see, if you take a snapshot during repolarization, you see, I'll draw it like this to illustrate it a little bit better. See positive charge moving from the outside of the heart inwards, like this. This is all moving in this direction, like this. And the negative charge is slowly being replaced. Well, not slowly. Happens very, very quickly, actually. But it's getting replaced. So instead of negative charge, we have positive charge. Now, because it's moving from outside inwards, it's moving this way. What we see is positive charge moving away from a positive lead. And as a result, positive charge moving away from a positive lead gives us an upstroke here, like we just said. So that's why our T wave is a positive deflection normally. Okay, so we have our P wave, QRS, and then a positive deflection, because the overall charge is moving away from the heart. Okay, moving away from the lead, I should say. Now you may notice that that's on the left side. On the right side there is positive charge. It's positive charge moving away as well. Okay, but remember the left ventricle is a much bigger mass of muscle, so its electrical signal is greater. Okay, so this lead is going to see that ultimately, even though there's charge coming in this direction, what it picks up is the bigger signal, which is over here. Okay, so it doesn't follow the same path as the ventricle does when it depolarizes. It just goes from outside in. So hopefully that all makes sense. Again, pause it, have a look back over this video, or that part of the video if it doesn't make sense. But we need to understand really why that happens as well, because that's going to really help us when it comes to T-wave inversion. So if we take a normal segment of the ventricle, so let's draw another ventricle here. Okay, when we have depolarization, as it travels up the Purkinje fibers, the Purkinje fibers themselves start on the inner part of the heart in the endocardium. Okay, and the charge, the depolarization I should say, as it goes up, it then goes across outshoots of the fibers, so it moves this way. Okay, so what that essentially means is that cells on the endocardium are the first to depolarize, and the ones on the epicardium depolarize last. So depolarization moves from the inside of the heart outwards. That's not good, hang on. Bear with me. Moves like this. Okay, so we see, remember the lead is positive and it only sees the outside, so it's going to see positive charge, negative charge I should say, moving from the inside outwards. Okay, so the overall signal is moving, wrong colour, is moving up the ventricle. Okay, but at a horizontal level it's moving from inside to out. However, as we've just said here, repolarization moves from the outside inwards. Okay, so repolarization is read as a positive charge. Now the reason for that is the actual electrophysiology of these different cells. Okay, so let's draw our membrane potential graph. Okay, so we won't go into too much detail. But essentially, what happens is if we draw the endocardium in a solid black line, we have this normal depolarization shape, okay? But the epicardium, I'm going to draw it with a dotted line, starts afterwards and finishes beforehand. So the way to think of it is that the endocardium is super duper keen, and it's the super keen medical student that is the first one at the lecture and it's the last one to leave. Okay, so that is this one here. Okay, so it's the first to arrive, last to leave, first to depolarize, last to repolarize. Whereas the epicardium, this one here, their cells, they're the kind of lazier one, which is the last to arrive, but also the first one to leave. I'll let you decide which one you are. But hopefully this diagram helps illustrate the point. So it pretty much explains fully why repolarization in the T wave moves from outside in, because those last cells, the first cells to repolarize are the epicardial ones and the last ones are the endocardium, and vice versa for depolarization. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. We're going to call it a day there for part 1 of this video. We'll call this video part 1. Any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. In the next one we're going to be looking at what happens when there is ischemia.